Couple of announcements I didn't share. First of all, our last hymn of the day is going to be number 405, not the one in the bulletin because that's a repetition, but number 405. And you'll recognize that when we get to it also. Also, second thing is today we're going to have an opportunity to gather again at 6 o'clock tonight to talk a little bit about that worship service we had back in the middle of December. Service of praise, prayer, and healing. And we'll have a little time of worship, and I promise not to overthink things, but what I really want to do is hear from people their experience of that time, and also talk a little bit about a future plan. There has been requests that we do it again. Actually, many requests that I cannot ignore. And so, with this cold week, I've been spending time in my office and chatting on the phone with this person and that person. And this, I think Tuesday or Monday, I was talking to Mark from Mark's Market in Rio. How many of you know of Mark's Market in Rio? Mark was kind enough to bring a feast along for our first gathering of praise, prayer, and healing on that Sunday evening back in December. And as I talked to him and I was asking him about his reflections on the night, and Mark was filled with good news from that evening this past December. Whether you know it or not, we did a lot of good that evening. There were people there who truly needed to be prayed for. They showed up. And just the few stories that I have heard, reflections, made it all worthwhile. The preparing of the time, the special music that was brought, the packing up of all of our stuff, moving down there, the baking of cookies and other goodies, and going out in the cold night to offer prayer in a new place. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, here's what happened. Here's what we did. We had this special time of worship at Smith's Chapel in Rio. And our number one focus, worship God. And the secondary thing was, if people showed up that needed to be prayed for, all the better. And people showed up. And things happened, wonderful things. There were surprises. For example, one of the big surprises for me is unplanned for, all of a sudden a group of young people from Rio churches just showed up. And they were welcoming us in there, and they were going to sing Christmas carols out in the parking lot, which I thought was good because I hadn't planned any Christmas carols for the evening, but God did. And they were going to sing. It was cold out, so I invited them in. I said, come on in and sing your Christmas carols. And so they came on in and sang their Christmas carols as a way of beginning our worship time. And then they were about to head off out into their world, and I said, wait a minute. I said, there's a song that we like to do in our church with our young people. And the song is called King of Kings and Lord of Lords. You know that song, right? With my special choreograph. Remember that one? Yeah. And there are special editions made up by, I think Lisa came up with some special editions. And so we taught them our song and had a wonderful beginning to our worship, a wonderful middle to our worship, and a wonderful end. And so that's how it went that night. And although those youth, by the way, hadn't planned to stay, most of them did, which was a good thing and really enhanced our time together. And so the night went. We sang, we prayed, and every once in a while I insert some of my thoughts into the worship time. And then we came toward the end of our worship service. Now you got to know that at the beginning of service, everybody was handed a white handkerchief, like this one. A plain white handkerchief, and it had a little drop of myrrh oil placed in the center. And that myrrh oil was symbolic of healing. And I said to them, people, I said, now this is your worship bulletin. It contains everything you need to know. And I'll tell you what, mixed in with that myrrh oil, there were several handkerchiefs that left with tears. The way people would touch that night. And by the way, I ordered 10 dozen of them. I got 5 dozen left, which already says to me, we got to do this again. Use up the supply. Where am I in my notes here? I forgot. And so I sent out this invitation at the end of the service. And I said, you all were given a handkerchief. And I said, also, in the room next door, a feast has been prepared. And there were Swedish meatballs, there were platters full of sandwiches, there were cookies and cupcakes and salads. And I said, you can do one or two things. Now, you can exit into the fellowship hall, or you can stay here and have prayer. There was a chair at the center of the sanctuary. A couple of people came up and sat in that chair, and we prayed for them. I said, now if you're not bold enough to come up and sit in the chair, just put that white handkerchief across your knee, and we'll come out there and join you for prayer. And people did, and we prayed for people, and lives were touched. And Mark said to me, People are still talking about that service in Ryle. They're asking, when is it going to happen again? Which kind of amazes me. But again, I wasn't in charge. None of us were in charge. God was in charge, and something happened. It was powerful. As I said to you before, it was, simply put, the best, most profound worship service I have ever attended anywhere at any time. And that includes a lot of worship. But let me get back to Mark here, the conversation I mentioned at the beginning. He told me that people are still talking about the service, and during our conversation, he mentioned a young man who'd been coming into his store. And he said this young man had a troubled past. He'd been doing drugs. He'd been in prison. A whole lot of things. And the young man was wanting to make a change, but he kept asking Mark the question, but what about the mistakes I've made? Can I still be redeemed even after all that I've done? All the things I've done wrong. And behind that question is, how can I be redeemed after what I've done? And Mark was sharing with this young man, trying to mentor him and tell him, today is today. You can't do anything about the past. You can't change it. But today is today, and today you can turn it around. And I was listening to his story, and I said, Mark, today happens to be my sermon title for my coming sermon next Sunday. Can I use your story? He said, yeah. He said, don't forget to turn to A.A. Milne. Y'all know who A.A. Milne is? Winnie the Pooh? Okay. Winnie the Pooh then. And he led me to this story where Winnie the Pooh asks, what day is it? It's today, squeaked Piglet. My favorite day, said Winnie the Pooh. My favorite day. Winnie the Pooh, I don't know about you, but Winnie the Pooh was required reading for my children when they were growing up. And I'm talking about Winnie the Pooh in the original language by A.A. Milne, not the new Disney version that's come out, but the original Winnie the Pooh. Full of wisdoms is this little stuffed bear. And I got to tell you, Winnie the Pooh is also one of those books I keep on my personal library. And I'm not talking about my private library at home. I'm talking about my professional library. Winnie the Pooh is right there between all those big-name theologians just to kind of keep me honest and remembering the best wisdom is the simple wisdom. Right? Winnie the Pooh, says things like, well, remember, rivers know this. There is no hurry. We shall all get there someday. Piglet asked Winnie one day, how do you spell love? Winnie says, you don't spell it, you feel it. Winnie says, if there is ever tomorrow when we're not together, there's something you must always remember. You are braver than you believe, stronger than you seem, and smarter than you think. But most important thing is, even if we're apart, I'll always be with you. My favorite character is Eeyore. I used to do a pretty good Eeyore when I was younger. Who says one day, it's snowing still, said Eeyore. So it is. And freezing. Is it? Yes, said Eeyore. However, he said, brightening up a little, we haven't had an earthquake lately. If Eeyore can even find something positive, then there's hope for all of us. As much as I enjoy reading A.A. Milne, he wasn't the one who suggested today's topic. I got that from the Bible. I actually read the Bible this week. And I read Deuteronomy chapter 26, and I had particularly noticed verse 17, where it says, today you have obtained the Lord's agreement. And I thought about that word, today. And I started really researching this word. And I got to wondering just how important is this concept to God. And I discovered that the idea of today is a major topic in the Bible. Read the book of Deuteronomy with this thought in mind, and you'll discover that the book of Deuteronomy should be subtitled the Book of Today. 60 times the word today is used in Deuteronomy, and not in casual manner like how you doing today, but emphatically today with an exclamation point. Examples, teach your children today. God is watching all that you do today. God's promises are for today. God's gifts are being given to you today. Worship God today and every day that happens to be today. That's kind of a paraphrase, but it actually does say that. And there are some in-between the line references that go like, remember today, so remember the teaching today, but this is it. It says, remember today that it is not your children, but it is you who must acknowledge His greatness, His mighty hand, and His outstretched arm. It's not for our children, but for you today to remember these things. It cannot be put off into the future. It's not your children, the people of tomorrow, but you who are here today who bear the responsibility to acknowledge God. You can't keep putting it on to the next generation. That's why I tell people this. Let me finish it before you get angry. I tell people in the church, our children are not the church's hope for the future. Our children are the future. We are the hope for the future. What we do for God today, that's our hope for the future. What we build for our children, because if we do not remember God today, how can they be taught and remember in the days ahead? Our children depend on what we decide to do today. For if we do not remember God today, there's no tomorrow for the people of God. Deuteronomy chapter 11. See, I am setting before you today a blessing or a curse. The blessing, if you obey the commandments of God today, you'll be blessed. And the curse, if you do not obey the commandments of the Lord your God, but turn from the way that I am commanding you today, the curse will come. It's our decision. That decision is today. Today's reading from Deuteronomy should be capitalized. Today, with exclamation point. Today, the Lord has obtained your agreement. Verse 17. Today, you have obtained the Lord's agreement. Today, this very day. Deuteronomy chapter 27, verse 9. This very day. What does this very day mean? Today, you got it. Okay, good. When somebody asks you today, what was the pastor's sermon about? What are you going to say? Today. Okay, good. I got one word across. And the emphasis, though, on today in the book of Deuteronomy is not without thought, not without meaning. It's done with purpose. It's in this writing in the present tense that reminds us that the teachings are for today. Today, applied to our lives today. They remind us that God's promises are the same promises today as they have always been. Today, God is reaching out His hand to you. This may sound cliche to some of us, but you know, back in my earlier days, I can remember hearing sermons from the pulpit. Sermons like, is God still alive? Is God still doing things in our world? And there were pastors, I can find sermons, pastors who are saying that God is no longer the God of miracles. That God set it in motion and now waits for us to kind of take charge and do what we can with it. But I can tell those pastors of old that today God is working among the people of God and the people we lead to His altar. God is still the God of miracles. I've seen those miracles now. It is still today. I'm so glad I remembered that on the day in December when God put this idea in my head. Praise, prayer, and healing, God called it. And I like most of it, but I said that healing part, that's kind of scary. What am I going to do with that? But I went with it because God said it. And to that day, which was today a long time ago, not today. But on that day called today, I did it. And even though I was sure nobody would go with me, I followed. But people jumped on it, didn't they? And we did good things. Today is another today, and tonight we are going to ask, what next? We're going to meet at 6 o'clock and recall that service of praise, prayer, and healing. And we're going to talk about that, and I just want to let you know this church can still do great things. We're going to celebrate a little bit what happened, and I want to hear how it touched your hearts. What part did you play? What made it what it was? Well, I know it was God, but I'm a details guy sometimes. Do you ever notice everything happens today? Wherever I am, it's always today. That's why we read the Bible, because it's happening today. So today we read in Matthew, and the first thing to note is that as Jesus is calling his disciples, he's expecting them to respond when?
Today.
Today. Jesus is walking, it says. It says, verse 18, as Jesus walked by. Jesus is walking, and this is not a casual statement. See, Jesus is walking. Jesus got his walking shoes on. He's got his walking stick in his hand. He's got his GPS in his pocket, and he's got his water bottle over his shoulder, and he is trekking. Jesus is walking. And you got to see that he's doing it. He's going to keep on walking. This is determined walking that Jesus does. And as Jesus is walking by the Sea of Galilee, he says, he sees Simon and Andrew. He's walking by, and he says to Simon and Andrew, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. And they know he's not going to stop. And so immediately they jump in and they follow him. And he's still walking, and he looks down the shore a little further, and there he sees James and John and says, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. And he keeps walking. And they immediately follow him. They jump up from their boat and their father and follow them. See, that's one thing disciples got going for them, is they know when God says today, he means, and today is the day to respond. Today is the day. Every time you put something off for tomorrow, you decrease the chance that it will ever happen at all. Is that true? Every time we say, I'll take to it tomorrow, what happens tomorrow?
I'll get to it tomorrow.
They'll get to it tomorrow. Tomorrow never comes, does it? Because it's always today, isn't it? It is that young man who made mistakes, who day by day desired something better, but each day he puts it off, and each day he becomes more and more distant from the idea that he's still redeemable. Jesus walked by him one day and called to him, and he did not respond. And so he watches Jesus walk off away from his life, walk off into the distance, perhaps walk over the hill out of sight. And it's true, Jesus keeps walking. And maybe you heard him call you once upon a time. And maybe you failed to respond. And you watched him walk away over the hill. Here's the thing I want you to remember. Jesus is walking by the Sea of Galilee. This is what you can tell your friends who are wondering, what about my past? Jesus is walking by the Sea of Galilee. He's walking by the shoreline. Now the Sea of Galilee is a little tiny sea. Okay? The average person can walk its length in a day. A very healthy person can go around the whole thing in one day. So Jesus is walking by. And the Sea of Galilee is like this oval, kind of like that racetrack I used to run around in high school. So if you're looking this way, watching Jesus recede into the sunset, and wondering, I'm too late, here's what you got to do. Just turn yourself around. And eventually you see him coming over the next hill. Because the Sea of Galilee is an oval. He's going to keep walking around. He's going to be walking past your life again and again and again and calling to you. But my advice is to respond today. Because someday, we're all going to be out of today's, aren't we? That's how it goes. And the longer you put it off, the less likely it will ever happen. Respond today. Here are some of my favorite today verses from the Bible, just to end my thoughts today. Matthew chapter 7:34. So do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will bring worries of its own. Today's trouble is enough for today. Matthew 21, the parable. What do you think? A man had two sons. He went to one son and said, go out to my vineyard today. One son said, no. But later on he went. The man went to his second son and said, go out and work in my vineyard today. And the second son said, I will go, Father. But he did not go. So Jesus says, which one did the work? Which one did the will of his Father? The one who did the work. Simple one. Hebrews chapter 3, verse 7 through 8, a little bit of verse 13. The Holy Spirit says, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts, but exhort one another every day, as long as that day is called today. You know what that means? That means that every day you are to be encouraging your brothers and sisters, calling to one another. If you have anything negative to say, or if you have any discouraging words you want to share with someone, I'll tell you what you do. Just hang on to them till tomorrow. Okay? Just save them for tomorrow. And if you ever live in tomorrow, go ahead. Today, whenever it's today, Encourage your brothers. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 8 says, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. Of course, there's that verse from Matthew 6, verse 10. We read every Sunday, give us this day, today, our daily bread. And my favorite, Joshua 24, verse 14. Choose this day, today, whom you will serve. As for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. I'm going to ask you to pray with me today. There's a prayer printed here in the bulletin. First thing I'm going to do is just ask you to read through it. Think about the words for a moment, and then we'll lift up the words together. Please read the small part titled the prayer. Will you read with me, please, this prayer? Say it. Days pass and years vanish, and we walk sightless among miracles. Lord, fill our eyes with seeing and our minds with knowing. Let there be moments when your presence, like lightning, illumines the darkness in which we walk. Help us to see, wherever we gaze, that the bush burns unconsumed, and we, clay touched by God, will reach out for holiness and exclaim in wonder, how filled with awe is this place, and we did not know it. Blessed is the Eternal One, the Holy God,